Most people think emotional intelligence means staying calm. It doesn't. It means noticing everything and choosing deliberately what to react to. That's a different skill entirely, and almost nobody has been taught the difference. You've been sold a version of emotional intelligence that looks like a yoga retreat. Soft voice, even temper, never raises her tone, never takes the bait, always the mature one in the group chat. That version sells courses. It does not survive contact with real life. Here's the uncomfortable part. The women who are actually emotionally intelligent are frequently the ones other people find slightly exhausting to be around. Not because they're difficult, because they don't perform the emotional labor everyone else has been trained to expect from them. And a system built on that labor does not reward the woman who stops supplying it. That's the whole video. 10 behaviors. Every one of them gets labeled a character flaw by people who don't understand what they're looking at. And every one of them is actually a defense mechanism built by a mind that got tired of being managed. There's a mechanism at the center of this that most people live inside without ever naming it, and I'm going to hold off on explaining it fully until habit 6, because once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it in your own life. Keep that in the back of your mind. It changes how you read everything that comes before it. Let's start with what almost nobody admits out loud. Habit 1. She apologizes less than you'd expect, and it unsettles people. Not because she's arrogant, because she stopped using apology as a social lubricant. Most people apologize to regulate the emotional temperature of a room, not because they did anything wrong. It's a nervous system habit, not a moral one. An emotionally intelligent woman has usually gone through the specific, humiliating exercise of tracking her own apologies for a week and realizing that 80% of them were for things that required no repair at all. Existing in a space, having a preference, taking up 3 extra seconds to finish a sentence. Once you see that pattern, you can't keep doing it without feeling like a fraud. So she stops, and the people around her who were relying on that apology as a signal that she'd stay small suddenly don't know what to do with her. Habit 2. She lets silence sit in a conversation without rushing to fill it. This is one of the most reliable tells there is, and almost nobody trains for it deliberately. Most people experience silence as social danger. It triggers the same threat circuitry as physical exposure, because for most of human history, social exclusion was a survival issue. So the brain panics, and the mouth fills the gap with whatever's closest. Reassurance, small talk, a joke that undercuts something real that was just said. An emotionally intelligent woman has usually done the specific work of sitting inside that discomfort on purpose, letting it get uncomfortable, and discovering that nothing bad happens. The silence just sits there. And once you've proven that to yourself enough times, the urge to fill it loses its grip. Habit 3. She remembers the tone of a conversation better than the content. Ask her what was said in a difficult exchange 3 weeks ago, and she might not recall the exact words. She'll recall exactly what shifted in the room, whether someone's jaw tightened, whether a joke came a half second too fast after something painful was said. This isn't intuition in the mystical sense people like to romanticize. It's pattern recognition running on a different data set. Most people are trained from childhood to track content, because content is what gets graded, tested, and rewarded. Almost nobody is trained to track tone, because tone doesn't show up on a report card. The women who developed this skill usually developed it out of necessity, in households or relationships where the actual content of what was said mattered far less than the emotional weather underneath it. It's a survival skill that outlived its original environment and became a permanent lens. Habit 4. She has fewer close relationships, and she stopped apologizing for that too. Social conditioning, especially for women, runs on an assumption of abundance. Be warm to everyone. Be available. A wide circle is treated as a personal virtue, and a narrow one gets quietly diagnosed as coldness or damage. But an emotionally intelligent woman eventually does the math on what a relationship actually costs her. Every connection requires bandwidth, attention, a kind of ongoing maintenance most people never account for consciously. She's not choosing fewer people because she's incapable of more. She's choosing fewer people because she's finally tracking the cost, and she'd rather go deep with 3 than shallow with 30. Habit 5. She notices when she's performing and calls herself out on it internally, mid-sentence. This one is subtle, and almost nobody talks about it, because it requires a level of self-monitoring most people never develop. You know the version of yourself that shows up at a family dinner versus a work meeting versus a first date. Everyone has these versions. Most people switch between them unconsciously, like changing outfits without remembering getting dressed. An emotionally intelligent woman starts to notice the switch as it happens. She'll catch herself mid-laugh and register, "That wasn't genuine. I did that because I read the room and decided it was expected." This sounds exhausting, and it is at first, but it's also the exact mechanism that eventually lets her stop performing altogether in the relationships that matter, because she's finally conscious of when she's doing it. Now here's where I want you to actually sit forward, because this next one is the one that explains everything before it and everything after it. Habit 6. She has stopped mistaking familiarity for compatibility. And this took her longer to unlearn than anything else on this list. Here's the mechanism. Your nervous system does not care whether a dynamic is good for you. It cares whether a dynamic is recognizable. If you grew up with a parent who ran hot and cold, who gave love inconsistently, who made you work for approval, your nervous system doesn't file that as painful. It files it as normal, as home. So years later, when you meet someone stable, someone consistent, someone who doesn't make you chase them, a specific and infuriating thing happens. It feels boring. It feels like nothing is happening. Meanwhile, the person who runs hot and cold, who keeps you slightly unsure of where you stand, lights up every reward circuit you have, because your body has confused unpredictability with intensity, and intensity with love. This is not a character flaw, it's a conditioning artifact, and it runs quietly under almost every repeated toxic dynamic you've ever watched someone rebuild with a new face on it. The emotionally intelligent woman is the one who eventually catches this pattern live, mid-relationship, and does the deeply unnatural thing of choosing the boring, stable option anyway, on purpose, while her body is screaming at her that something's wrong. That override, choosing regulation over familiarity, is possibly the single most valuable skill on this entire list, and almost nobody teaches it directly because it requires admitting your own nervous system has been lying to you for years. If that one landed anywhere close to home, do me one favor before I go further. Subscribe now while it's fresh, because the back half of this list gets more specific and more useful, and I don't want you to lose the thread. And when you're done watching, I want you to drop a comment telling me if you are an emotionally intelligent woman, or the time you met an emotionally intelligent woman and how the relationship was. I read every one of these.
Habit 7. She asks fewer questions to get reassurance and more questions to get information. Most people, when anxious, ask questions that are really just requests for comfort in disguise. Are we okay? Is this fine? Do you still like me? The question format hides what's actually a plea. An emotionally intelligent woman eventually notices she's doing this and starts rewriting the question itself. Instead of asking for reassurance, she asks for the actual data she needs to make a decision. What do you need from me right now? What changed between last week and this week? It's a small linguistic shift with an enormous consequence because it moves her out of the passenger seat of the relationship and back into an active, informed position. Habit 8. She lets people reveal themselves instead of interrogating them for proof. Most people, especially anyone who's been burned badly once, develop a habit of testing others. Small traps, loaded questions, watching for inconsistency like a detective building a case. It feels like due diligence. It's actually exhausting, and it usually backfires because people can feel when they're being tested, and it changes how they behave around you. The emotionally intelligent woman has usually learned, expensively, that patience reveals character more reliably than interrogation ever will. She stops testing and starts simply watching, over time, without an agenda. The information she needs arrives on its own schedule, and it's more accurate for having not been forced. Habit 9. She has a very specific, very private threshold for when a conversation is no longer worth continuing, and she exits before it gets ugly, not after. Most people stay in arguments past the point of usefulness because leaving feels like losing, and losing threatens the ego. There's a specific psychological trap here worth naming directly. The sunk cost fallacy doesn't just apply to money, it applies to emotional investment in a single conversation. The longer you've been arguing, the harder it feels to walk away, even after the actual issue has been buried under 20 minutes of tone and ego. An emotionally intelligent woman has usually been burned enough times by conversations that went nuclear that she's built an internal alarm for the moment things stop being productive, and she has the discipline to leave at that exact moment, even mid-sentence, even if it looks like she's losing. She isn't. She's the only one in the room still making a rational decision. Habit 10. She has stopped needing the other person to admit they were wrong before she can move forward. This is the hardest one on this list, and it's usually the last one anyone develops. Most people hold an internal ledger, waiting for an admission of guilt before they'll allow themselves to heal or move past something. The problem is that admission almost never comes on schedule, and sometimes it never comes at all, so the waiting becomes its own prison, one you built and are guarding yourself. The emotionally intelligent woman eventually does something that looks, from the outside, like letting someone off the hook. It isn't. She's simply stopped outsourcing her own peace to someone else's willingness to be honest. She holds her own verdict internally and releases the need for external confirmation of it. That's not forgiveness in the soft greeting card sense. It's a hostage release, and she's the hostage she's freeing.
So here's what all 10 of these actually have in common, and it's not softness, and it's definitely not the version of emotional intelligence they sell you in a workshop with scented candles. Every single one of these behaviors is the direct result of someone refusing to run on autopilot anymore, refusing to apologize on reflex, refusing to fill silence out of fear, refusing to confuse chaos with chemistry just because her body recognized the shape of it, refusing to wait for someone else's confession to grant her permission to feel okay again. The system, and I mean the actual architecture around you, the social conditioning, the approval loops, the algorithms that reward your predictability, the childhood patterns installed before you had any say in the matter, all of it is built to keep you reactive. Reactive people are easy to manage. They apologize on cue, they chase inconsistency, they wait for permission. The moment you start running any one of these 10 behaviors, you become slightly harder to manage, and the people and systems that benefited from your predictability will label it a personality problem, because that's easier than admitting they've lost a lever they used to have on you. You don't need all 10 today. Pick one. The apology tracking is the easiest place to start, and it takes exactly 7 days to see the pattern clearly. Just count. Don't change anything yet. Just count how many times you apologize for something that required no repair. That single data point will tell you more about how much of your life is running on autopilot than anything else on this list. You didn't come into this with a flaw that needed fixing. You came into this running code you never wrote, installed by people and systems that had every reason to keep you exactly where you were. What you're building now isn't coldness, and it isn't distance. It's the specific, quiet authority of someone who finally reads her own reactions before she trusts them.